There we go. Perfect. Good. So for those of you that joined us yesterday, you'll know that my name is Ben von Crumpler and I'm Chief Operating Officer at 2 to 3 Days. For those of you that didn't, hello, it's nice to meet you and thank you for coming. So today is the second of our second of our 5 virtual events that we're hosting this week in honour of International Women's Day tomorrow. And of course, this year's theme is Embrace Equity. And the goal of this is to get us all talking about why equal opportunities aren't enough, and acknowledging that people start from different places and have different life opportunities on the way. So for true inclusion, equitable action and fairness is needed. And we all know that the world of equity in the workplace isn't perfect. And this imperfection speaks to the very reason that 2 to 3 Days exists. So before I hand over to our guest speaker, Denyse Willier, just a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll have noticed I've popped the recording on just to let you know that, because it will be shared with attendees that couldn't make it today. We will allow time for questions, but please at the end, but please feel free to use the chat function. It should be working well today. And of course, if you have a burning question for Denyse as she's speaking, please just, pop your yellow icon hand up and we'll be able to answer your question as we go, and I'll keep an eye on the screen, or of course, pop them in the chat. So let's crack on and introduce you to Denyse. Denyse is the ex-CEO of Age UK, amongst other accolades. And for the past 10 years, she's specialised in helping ambitious female founders grow their businesses. And nothing lights a fire in Denyse like helping talented women connect with their purpose and make this a strategic driving force in the success of their business. So welcome, Denyse. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, Benvern, and thank you so much to everybody for joining us for this session. So I've kind of prepared a set of sort of like thoughts of what I wish I'd known when I started my business, that I think is applicable to anybody starting a business, but particularly for women. So I'm going to talk about that, but just sort of before I get into that, I also wanted to sort of speak about how I kind of came to start a business, because as Benvern explained, I was in a chief exec role, and it's actually not usual for people in CEO roles, from what my observation, to actually move into starting their own business. Typically, they'll go on to another CEO role or to do a sort of like portfolio career with sort of like non-exec director type roles. That's quite often the trajectory. And so the course that I took was, I think, probably a little bit unusual at the time. And so I just wanted to set it in that context, and also just to say what I'm not going to do is rehash the sort of advice that you can very easily find online in books about starting a business. It's very much some few things that I think I underestimated, and which I see being underestimated all the time. So what I'd really love is to know a bit more about you. So you're here because the title of the talk is Starting a Business, Here's What You Need to Know. So I'm kind of guessing that most of you are thinking about that, but we've got a poll and Benvern's going to put it up for you. So if you wouldn't just mind answering the question about, are you actually considering? So it's, yeah, just kind of floating through. Okay, so that's interesting. So just slightly under, around 50% of you are saying yes, and then the other half are undecided. So that actually is a very nice segue to my next question, which is, what's your top concern about starting a business? So we've pulled out some of the reasons that people typically give, and particularly women typically give. So, I need to just share the results. I think I can end the poll. Oh, hang on. So yeah, so we've got the next one up here. So your top concern about starting a business. So I think we've got having enough money, balancing kind of family responsibilities, not having a strong enough business idea, lack of knowledge about what's involved, lack of confidence, lack of support from within your immediate circle. So I'm talking like friends and family here, and then something else that isn't there. So let's just have a little look and see what we've got kind of coming out. So just numbers are all slightly bobbing around there. So okay, so not having a strong enough business idea, which is something that I'm going to touch on in this talk, and lack of knowledge have come out kind of even, and then the money one, which is a very common one with women-led businesses, is up there, and lack of confidence as well. And whoever's put there's something else, if you want to just pop that in the chat, that would be really interesting to know. If you don't, then feel free to share or not share, whatever is going to work for you. So do I need to do anything with that poll now, Benford? Stop sharing?
No, I think,
Okay.
well, unless I've stopped sharing from my side, so hopefully, and I don't think it's on the screen anymore.
Okay, it's staying there on mine, but anyway.
Well, by all means, just press end poll.
Moved it on. So yeah, so I'm going to definitely touch on one or two of those concerns during this talk. So like I said in the introduction, you know that my background was as a chief exec, that you'll have inferred from that I worked my way up like senior management and leadership ladder, did a fair amount of kind of management, leadership, business training. And it was probably about 4 or 5 years into the role that I started very seriously thinking about what was next. I've been doing a big piece of turnaround work. It was a very difficult, challenging piece of work. And so, kind of 4 or 5 years in, it was like, so what's next? And like I said, the typical thing for someone in my position to do would be to go for another CEO role or build a portfolio career. But I kind of really wanted to strike out on my own and do my own thing. I wanted the kind of space to be even more kind of creative and more flexible with the things that I wanted to do. But one of my kind of big early concerns was whether my idea was good enough, whether it was strong enough. And by that I meant, was it going to be commercially viable, and were people going to buy? Was it going to be profitable, and all of those good things? And one of my observations working as a consultant is there's actually quite a lot of businesses where the idea isn't very strong. It's just not strong enough to be commercially viable. And so that's really the first thing you need to think about is, does your problem solve a need or a problem that a substantially enough group of customers will be interested in, and can you do so in a way that's going to be different to everybody else? And I'm going to touch on that a bit more in the moment. So sort of like by way of illustrating what I would see as being an idea that addresses a problem and need and does it in a different way, is that I was recently talking to the founder of a vitamin company, and she had a chronic health condition. She tried all sorts of treatments to regain her health, and what had really worked for her were vitamin patches from the USA, but they weren't available here in the UK or the EU. So she decided to solve the problem that she'd had by starting a business selling these vitamin patches. And what she found was a ready market of customers for whom oral vitamins, like pills and even the liquids, just weren't effective, or they just weren't suitable. And so I thought that was a really brilliant example of somebody solving a need or a problem that they'd had, and doing so in a way that was different to what's happening in the marketplace. And the strongest businesses are those which, like I say, solve a need, but quite often you'll find they've come out of a problem that the founder has had to solve as well. And if I think about the women-led businesses that I admire, that's very typically the case, that the business has been created to solve something that's been a problem for them. So my second lesson is about really developing a deep understanding of your target market and who is your ideal client. Now, I don't know if any of you got sort of like branding or marketing backgrounds. That's kind of sounds like a very kind of obvious thing, but it's something that I see businesses not do. They just don't really delve deeply enough into who are their target customers and develop a really deep understanding of who is the kind of the perfect fit for them. And certainly I wouldn't say that that was something that I considered deeply enough when I started my business. I was able to get away with that like 10 years ago. I feel like I'm talking about ancient history there, like, because the world has changed so much, because the market that I'm in hadn't mushroomed in the way that it has in the last few years. So it was less of a problem. But I focus very much on building my clientele, my customer base through the business networking groups that I attended and the kind of people I got to know in business that were around me. And that worked really well in terms of building a customer base. And I built a sort of good consulting practice off the back of that. But what it didn't do was position me as an expert in a particular area. And that was something that came a bit later on. And if we jump forward to today, because we're now in this very digital world, and it's hard to start a business, I think, without mastering digital marketing and that digital world. Being your business being expert, being experienced, being a sort of authority in the chosen area is really, really important in terms of the way that Google ranks businesses and the way that Google ranks content. And they've recently kind of upgraded the way that they rank digital content to new with some changes, and which are called what they're looking for is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And they put a renewed emphasis on this. So the whole, if I was starting my business again, and definitely sort of like thinking about SEO and my content strategy, I'd be wanting to pay very serious attention to that, and really thinking about my whole digital footprint and how I was building out both my personal brand as well as my business brand online. So I don't want to kind of get into the weeds on that, but it's this, what I want to get over is this idea of it's really important that you're clear with your business about exactly what you want to be known for and who you want to be known by. And that's just as applicable whether you're a service-based business like mine or a product-based business. So a kind of example, a different kind of example I give is somebody else I've just been talking to recently, and she has a business selling hair accessories. And what she's done is a brilliant, brilliant job of creating content on her website, on YouTube, on Instagram. So her whole digital footprint really demonstrates that they have a solution to every type of hair accessory, hair need that there is, and have done it brilliantly. So it's applicable to both service-based and product-based businesses. So the next thing I want to circle back to is this question of whether a business solves a need or a problem in a way that's different to anybody else. So that's my third lesson, is that customers are overwhelmed with options, and they really want to understand very quickly what makes one product or one brand different from another. And so knowing how to position yourself and your products makes all the difference between standing out and blending in. And that's, I think, particularly important for female founders, because it relates to one of the things that's I've been identified as a barrier for women in business, which is confidence. And so to stand out, you've kind of really got to put your big girl pants on and kind of be prepared to put a sort of stake in the ground, because blending in is not going to help you, you know, when you're starting a business. So you probably, a lot of you will be familiar with the term unique selling proposition. That's something that we typically talk about when we're talking about brand positioning. And so it's really being very clear from the get-go about what is the one thing that makes your business different and better to the competition. And this really needs to be something that can't be copied, or is very difficult to copy, and certainly not something that can be copied to the degree that you've done it. So I'm hoping that if I've done my job well at the beginning of the session, you will be really clear about what my USP is. And so I'm just going to invite you to put that in the chat and kind of brace myself that I haven't actually communicated my USP very clearly, but I just love to know what you kind of picked up from my introduction, because it was something that I must have mentioned 7 times. So as being my USP. So just give a kind of moment just to sort of see what people come up with. Somebody'd like to guess.
I don't think we have anybody putting anything in the chat that I can
I know.
Ladies. Oh, there we go. Laura. Thank you, Laura. Consulting. That's what Laura said. Anyone else? Or take yourself off mute and just chip in if you don't want to use the chat. Oh, an older person advocate.
Okay.
Anyone else? No, we're very quiet today.
But that's interesting, because one of the things that people really struggle to wrap their heads around is what is a unique selling point. What is the thing that makes us very, very different? It's one of the things when I'm working with clients. I have to kind of approach it in a variety of different ways to kind of pull it out of people. So one of my unique selling points is the fact that I was a chief executive.
Yes,
that as a kind of in the business consulting coaching space, it's I've probably met one other person who was a chief exec. Sorry, in the SME space, in the sort of like consulting space with large substantial businesses, that might be slightly different. And the reason I emphasize that is because I spent much of my career of business planning, strategic planning, all of that kind of the whole management and implementation piece. And I have that hands-on experience that my competition don't have. So that's kind of that's one of what I would see as my USP. And going back to my point about can it be copied, is nobody else can copy that, because if they haven't had that career, it's just not duplicatable. So you know, I've been able to land on something quite unusual there.
And also another thought that was mentioned is just your focus on women. So
yes, that also is another USP, and the focus on purpose-led women as well. and my take that I have a take that is one of the things that helps women-led businesses to get ahead of the curve too. So I'm going to just see, has anybody got any ideas of brands with a great USP, of something that's a big differentiator? So just sort of like to try and illustrate the point of what a USP is. One of my favorite brands is the White Company. And yes, you know, white products can be copied, but the White Company have sort of like created that kind of homeware brand in such a way that it would be very difficult for anybody to compete with them on that proposition of stylish homeware mostly in white. So has anybody got any sort of other thoughts around that they would like to share? Also doing that, I'm just going to put you there on the spot, Benvan. Is there a brand that you kind of really
thinking
love?
about that question.
Yeah.
I think it's not a brand I use. Maybe I'm not the target market, but I think Gymshark do it really well. It's a really competitive space, but I think they kind of really carved out the kind of for everybody sort of perception that exercise is completely accessible and you can look good while you do it. And regardless of your, you know, the perception of sports brands that you need to be an athlete, you know, they've kind of democratized it. So that's the one that pinged to mind. IKEA has been mentioned, which I think is a very good one. Yeah. So this sort of the fourth area that I think is really underestimated, and certainly one I very much underestimated when I started my business, kind of builds on these themes, because we've been talking about really the key components of building a brand and brand strategy. And that's my fourth area in the business books, online. When you kind of very typically what's talked about in relation to building a brand is all the kind of visual identity piece. So the logo, the images, the photography that you might use, colors, fonts, all of those kind of things. Might get into things like brand story as well, perhaps that kind of an area. And that's kind of like very much the focus, and it's certainly the focus when in kind of business planning as well. And really those elements are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to brand strategy. And so we've talked about some of the key components already. So being clear about what you want to be known for, who you want to be known by, so that's your ideal customers and your target market, and what really makes your company stand out from the competition. And so I'd like to just go a little bit deeper into brand strategy without going into the weeds about this. And whilst I'm doing that, if you've got an example of a woman-led brand, particularly, that you think has a really, really strong brand, and if they've got a really strong brand, that means they've got a very strong brand strategy. That would be really great. So this would be a brand led by a woman that you love, trust and respect. So you kind of really admire. So I've mentioned one of mine already, which is the White Company, which was started by Chrissy Rucker. And another brand that I absolutely love that's started by a woman is Cézanne. I'm a huge fan of Cézanne, and that was started by Morgan Cézanne in France. So just whilst we're sort of talking about that, if you've got any examples that spring to mind, pop them in the chat, that would be brilliant. If you don't, that's not actually unusual, because the media very much focuses on businesses led by men. So everything in the media is pretty much
examples of male-led businesses. And so it's not unusual that people kind of struggle to think of women-led brands.
We've got 4 or 5 here.
Have you?
For some reason, sorry, ladies, I know the chat's only coming to me. Another little weird thing that's going on with technology today. But we've got Anne Summers, Serafina, Orla Keeley, Liz Earle, Waitrose, Netta Porter, and Aspiga. And I must admit, I don't know Aspiga, so I do apologise, Laura, if I have pronounced it incorrectly.
So quite a few sort of brands in the kind of retail, fashion, and those are areas where women-led businesses are very, very strong. So the reason brand strategy is so important is because it's all about building connection with the customer, and it's this which partly drives brand awareness, people knowing about that you exist and kind of hearing about you, seeing you around. But it also does things like improves the customer loyalty. It's what brings you repeat business, and it inspires what we call the holy grail of marketing, which is word of mouth referrals and kind of introductions and so on. And businesses, brands without a strong brand strategy become sort of like diluted and weak and forgettable. And I think we could probably all think of perhaps businesses that we really liked, and then they've kind of gone off the boil a bit. That's almost certainly because something's happened with their brand strategy and it's become weak or diluted in some way or another. Actually, an example that comes to my mind is there's Burberry have just done a big fashion show for London Fashion Week, and with their new creative director, and that was a big old relaunch of getting back to Burberry's heritage and its roots, because they felt that they had moved too far under the previous kind of creative director from what the brand was all about. So it was very much kind of getting back to the heritage of the brand that it had been. So that would be a really good example of that. So the sort of 4 kind of key elements of a brand strategy, the language I use, people use different words, different language, but I talk about purpose, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail in a moment, the perception of the brand, the positioning, which we've talked about a little bit, and then the packaging of the brand. So those very much, in the kind of visual, and increasingly in this sort of digital online world, trying to create sensory experiences of the brand and really kind of trying to bring it to life in different ways beyond the visual and beyond the sound that you would get with video medium as well. So those are kind of the 4 key elements of a successful brand strategy. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, other than to say that I just think it's one of the most underestimated and underrated activities when it comes to starting a business.
May I ask, just at that point, what when you set yours up then, with that, with brand strategy in mind, what would you say you reflected on that you would do differently if you were starting out again?
I think the thing, it's funny because I kind of follow that classic business planning process. So there's a kind of number of questions that you ask when you answer when you're putting together your business plan. And so that does touch on elements of brand strategy. And I think the difficult thing is you don't know what you don't know. So I think I was quite confused about the difference between the kind of graphic design aspect and brand strategy itself. So so I would say that even though I worked for organizations that had brands, it wasn't something we concentrated on. So that's really just, it's something I've learned as I've gone along and kind of been increasingly interested in, because I think it's one of the things that helps women-led businesses overcome some of the obstacles they face when sort of starting and growing a business, and it has an accelerant effect. Yeah, so then the fifth thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's my kind of one of my favorite things, is about the future of business is purpose-led. So that kind of fits in with one of the sort of four pillars of brand strategy that I just mentioned. So there have been a number of pieces of research around this, and a recent survey by PwC found that 83% of customers think that companies should be much more proactive in the kind of whole environmental, social, governance, well, that whole kind of ESG space. And 91% of business leaders believe that their company has a responsibility to act on ESG. So ESG is kind of a level on from CSR, and is much more about having a clarity about what your business stands for and what its values and position is in relation to your people, in relation to the planet, and increasingly in relation to purpose as well. And so, and I think, and the more research that there is into purpose-led business, the more it's becoming understood that it actually leads to greater growth and greater profitability, greater sustainability in the sense of stability in a business as well. And so one of the questions I get when I'm working with my clients who are interested in this, but are kind of like, what should be my area of impact? And that is basically links to what should my purpose, what's my purpose? And for some businesses, say they're very much in the sustainability space, that's very easy to then link it to impact. For other businesses, it needs a little bit more thinking through. And the answer quite often comes from the things that you as the founder are particularly passionate about. So we've got a brilliant example with 2 to 3 days about Juliet and Benvan and the team being absolutely passionate about gender equality, and that's the impact that they want to have in the world. And it's the same for me as well. The purpose of my business is to advance gender equality and women's empowerment, and the lens that I'm particularly looking at it through is female entrepreneurship and helping female founders to successfully grow and scale their businesses, because I've got a lot of views on this, but one of them is that the more women are able to kind of operate in the economic space, the quicker the things that are problems with the world will get solved, is basically my kind of thesis around that. But what I think is important to be aware of is that although women are actually slightly more ambitious than men when it comes to starting and growing businesses, there are some sort of structural inequalities which actually make the playing field uneven. And female entrepreneurship's come a very long way just in the last 10 years. And it's made a very big leap forward in the last 3 years, because there was a huge research piece of work done by Alison Rose and her team. She's the CEO of NatWest. So they did something called the Rose Review into female entrepreneurship. And that kind of set out the barriers that women face in business and the issues in a lot of detail. And I think don't want to get into this now, but one of the things that I think I hadn't really thought through when I moved from my career into starting a business was that there are lots of initiatives for gender equality in the workplace. There's still a long way to go, but that doesn't actually exist in the business world. So it's much more a free for all in that sense. Like I was talking about some areas of progress since the Rose Review was published in 2019. And one of the big areas is actually female founders have started more businesses in the last year than at any time before. So 150,000 new businesses were started by women last year, even though we've got this sort of challenging economic environment, lots of uncertainty and all the rest of it, is that women responded to all of that actually with innovation and an entrepreneurial spirit. So I kind of thought that was fantastic news and kind of a good way, in a sense, to sort of like start to, to bring this all together and wrap this up. So I just really wanted to end this by celebrating the female entrepreneurs who have responded to the times that we're in with, some real bottle and, set about setting up their own new businesses. So we've covered 5 areas that I think are very much underestimated. And so I'm just going to briefly summarize them, which is to make sure that your business solves a need or a problem and that is meaningful to customers, and it can do so in a way that is different to what everybody else is doing, to develop a very deep understanding of your target market and who is your ideal client, to really develop a good understanding of brand strategy and learn how to apply that to the business building process, and to understand that the future of business is purpose-led, and that is it's going to be increasingly important to consider people, planet and purpose, and in terms of the impact of your business going forward. So hopefully I've been able to sort of touch on some of the concerns that were raised at the sort of like when we put the poll up at the beginning, and cover some of those off. Hopefully that's given you some kind of encouragement and some inspiration. Maybe some people who were a bit undecided have kind of moved a bit more into the, oh, okay, this could be really interesting, because actually the brand building piece, it's creative, it's fun, it's exciting. Benvan loves brand building, so I'm sure she'll be she'll be agreeing with me there. So all of those things are, it's just enormous fun building a brand. So I kind of really wanted to wind up by emphasizing those points. And then we just got a sort of like last thing for if people want to, just wanted to wrap up with, was around the female founders that you most admire. So have we had any other suggestions come through?
Not yet, but while people are pondering, I just wanted to raise a question that had been asked, just recommendations for, by the way, everybody, please, we've got a few more minutes. So if you have some personal questions, you want to come off mute and just and pop your camera on if you would like to, and just ask Denyse a direct question. We have her for a few more minutes, so you may have a burning one about your own consideration. So please have a think. Meanwhile, there's just a question about good reading resources for this topic, because obviously there's just such a wealth of information out there. As you said at the beginning, it's sort of curating it in a way that is helpful, not overwhelming for people. Do you have any resources that you would point them to? I don't think you've yet written a book, forgive me.
No, I haven't.
So maybe some other recommendations.
I've had a few goes at it. It's really quite difficult, actually. Do
you have any top reads?
For starting a business, I think what I would say is dig out the female founder stories. When I was starting my business, I kind of went off to the bookshop to look for business books, and was met by the sort of Alan Sugar's and those kind of business books, and there really wasn't anything out there written by female founders. And that's what I would suggest that you do, is you go sort of like see whether any of your favorite female founders have written a book. So the Jo Malone's is quite a romp, and through her business journey, it's really quite fascinating. Anya Hindmarsh has written a book about her business journey. I have a notion that Jenny Packham may have done as well. So is to, I think, look out for the stories of women, because they will also, I think, mostly emphasize kind of this whole brand piece as well. That some of the points that I've made, I think they would very much pick up on. I mean, all the kind of start of business books that I can think of are all pretty much of a muchness.
Yeah, no standouts.
They kind of like, they're all very, very similar.
But thank you for the question, because it's just given me an idea that that's a good reading list for us to put together at 2 to 3 days to give you that resource. It's, as I always feel, it's just curation from a trusted source that you feel it's time well spent. So thank you for the question, and I'll put that on the list. And does anyone want to I have one question just about qualities, actually, if I may. Just tenaciousness and resilience and a degree of braveness are all obvious qualities, but in your experience now, having helped many female founders, what would you say the top 3 qualities are that rise to the top to be successful, or when you're getting started, just to be clear, when you're out of the gates?
So I think discipline focus would be my number one. Is that, like, once you've kind of established what your roadmap is to growing your business, to starting growing a business, is being really disciplined about sticking to that roadmap, because it takes a while to see results and for things to happen. And so the worst thing in the world is to be sort of like deviate and be distracted from the path that you're on. The second one ties into that, which is about consistency, is particularly when it comes to marketing, you have to be relentlessly consistent and produce the content, kind of do the social media, do all the things on a regular and consistent basis when you don't feel like doing it, or when you're struggling to come up with bright ideas. Whatever it is, consistency kind of trumps everything. It's just it's showing up. And then the third one I would just say is to make sure that you create a kind of environment for yourself that is kind of like a bit like a cocoon, that to keep your confidence up. Confidence is so important in business, and how you're feeling. So if you're, the more you can keep your spirits up, keep your confidence up, the more that it will help you with particularly with the consistency thing and with the discipline thing as well. So I think that would be my third one.
Very good, thank you. And another great question just about the main differences and experiences of male versus female founders. I appreciate you work predominantly with women now, but with a worldview, what would you, funding comes to mind, getting investment comes to mind, but with your experience, what would you say the main differences in those experiences are?
I think, certainly money is a big difference, in that women generally start their businesses with a lot less money than men do, and it's been very hard to get access funding. That's starting to change largely as a result of the Rose Review. The second one is around balancing family responsibilities. Is that women, I typically see women having less time to spend on their business because of sort of taking on the kind of like more of the domestic work within the home. And so male-led businesses they typically have 3 hours a day more, because they're not thinking about any of that at all. Like literally, I would struggle to think of a conversation I had with a male client where domestic responsibilities were on his mind. So that's a real big one as well. And then confidence as well. That would be another kind of big difference. And I think that there's a lot, I see a lot of kind of advice and information out in the online world that sort of like giving advice to women about what to do in their business. I don't see that happening with men in the same way. I don't think they don't use social media in the same way, so they don't come across all of this, and that can very easily sap kind of confidence and allow doubt to creep in about the roadmap that you've got for your business. So those would be my 3 things.
Okay, thanks, Denyse. Would anybody else, before we let you go, because I appreciate we're 5 minutes over our allotted spot. Oh, we do have one more question. So with limited startup capital, where would you recommend spending it first? Good question. So is that brand strategy? Put your energy into that and your spend, or your website, for example, or your platform that's going to tell the world what you are?
I think, I don't, in lots of ways, I think that having to bootstrap your business there are some benefits to that, because it means that you have to really prove your concept, and you have to work hard to prove your concept. And sometimes when businesses have quite a lot of money, you'll often hear the stories where they've got investment, like big levels of investment, and actually they haven't really proved their concept, because they've had so much money to kind of throw at the wall about it. So I don't always see it as being a bad thing. Where would you put your money? I think it's about, there's the product and making sure that the product is as good as it can be without tipping too much into perfectionism. So that is one place. And then I think the second is in choosing very carefully the forms of marketing that you're going to do. And it's a toss-up between, do you invest in your visual identity, or do you make some money so that then you've got the money to invest a bit more in it? And if you've got limited money, then you've got to really get out and market and get some sales in. So it's choosing like those 1 or 2 sort of like platforms where you're going to market, and doing that really, really well. Yeah. And then adding, so not trying to spread your resources too thin.
Yeah, sort of having a minimal viable product, isn't it? And then choose your biggest kind of gateway. And in some cases, that may not be a website, to be fair, depending who your target market is. So I suppose one does have to get the brand strategy thinking in good shape. So, to your point at the beginning, you really have nailed who your customer is, because then you will know the best the best gateway to reach them. And that may be a website, it may be Instagram, it may be podcasts, it may be the format may change depending on who you're trying to reach.
Yeah, I started my business with just my LinkedIn profile. It was well over a year before I had a website, and then just like my route to market was through business networking, and I went all in on that, and invested my sort of like the time and resources that I had in that, and then that worked. Because I was so concentrated on that, and it was the right strategy for my business. it meant I got results quickly.
Absolutely. Okay, last shout, last call for any other questions in the chat, or take yourself off mute before we wrap up today. No, I will take that as a no. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Denyse, for sharing your wisdom and your experience. Very much appreciated. And everybody on the call, you'll be receiving an email with the recording. So if you choose to play it back, please do, and take any other notes. And I will include Denyse's kind of forwarding details in that email. So if you wish to contact her hereafter, you will have them directly. So just need to say thank you again, Denyse, and everybody. Wish you well, a great afternoon, and maybe see some of you across the rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.